Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining me for another whiskey review today, everybody. And I am extremely excited to be tasting this again. We are going to go through the Lucky 7 15-year proprietor. So these were 14-year last year. Now the age statement's going up. Now we're 15 years old. This one comes in at 130 proof. This is a store pick from Bourbon Street. But we're going to break this one down, and I get to have a lot of fun drinking it again because this was one of my favorite bourbons of 2022. And hey, we get to see if maybe the 15 is going to become one of my favorite bourbons of 2023. We'll have to see. Let's break this one down together. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Let's kick off the show. All right. So, as I said off the top of the show here, we are going to go over the Lucky 7 15-year proprietor. This is barrel 41 for those that like to keep track of that sort of thing. 130.9 proof, but there is a very important detail on this one that is changing. And that is something to keep in mind when and if you see these in 2023, especially with this new age statement of 15 years. But the hype on these Lucky Sevens has been taking off for quite a while. I mean, we're about a year, almost a year and a half into this journey with these. When the news of these started coming out at first, they were getting compared to Kings of Kentucky and being contenders for King, like comparison points for King of Kentucky. But the thing is, they were a whole lot cheaper. When they first came out, I mean, you were looking at price points of 120, 130, 140, almost essentially $10 per year on the 14-year age statement. But as the hype grew, I noticed over the course of 2022 that the prices started creeping. And when I got to get this one local one to me from the party source, it cost me 160. And then this one here, price is creeping up again, 200. And I have heard different things from different people in different areas on what the price is on the 15-year Lucky Sevens. I've heard 160 still, I've heard 180, I've heard 200. So whether it's the distillery, the distributor, or the retailers are the ones that are starting to see the value and raise the prices up to try to match the hype. Somebody in the chain's raising the prices. It's getting up to 200, and it's a price point that starts making me a little uncomfortable, and I really hope it doesn't go up any further. But we will get into that more as we go through the tasting and as we go through the official reviews. But this was number one or number two on my top five bourbons of 2022. Not to say that I had one single barrel that I was trying to highlight to be my top, but the fact that I got to try so many different single barrels, I got to understand the spectrum of what those single barrels had to offer at different proof points, really narrowing in on things that were 130 proof or higher as being the ones that stood out. But even getting to sample three, four, five different barrels that were in that higher proof range. Oh my gosh, they are all utterly amazing and curl my toes a little bit. So, special shout out to whiskey friend OH for helping me taste so many of these. Without OH, I would have really maybe only come across one or two of these. One of which would have been at like 118 proof, and I wasn't really a big fan of it. It didn't have that extra octane that the 130 proof plus has. So big shout out to OH. And on that theme, OH gets to be our first guest review, and we're going to get to see his scores by the end of this video. And I'm really excited to incorporate this into the channel and into the format. You know, when we have these chance to do guest reviews from whiskey friends and get their points of view, it just gives you even more information and the spectrum of scores and the different tastes that are available on there. So I actually even have some flavor notes from OH, but I'm going to ignore those until after I go through the tasting. So without further ado, let's get into the nose. Let's get into the tasting of the Lucky 7 15-year proprietor. Now, I did let this one sit out for, I guess it's been out for about 20 minutes at this point, now that we're getting into it, as I was setting up for this video. You can see I've gone through this one quite a bit. I have struggled on it just a little bit. When I initially opened it, I thought it was a little too tight, a little over oaked. And then every subsequent tasting of it that I did, it got better and better and better, which then delayed me being able to review it because I was like, man, my point of view keeps changing. Like, what am I going to say? I need to make sure this doesn't change and I got a good fuel view of this thing. I think I do now, and I think I'm pretty settled on where this thing is going to fall as far as the official review is concerned. Well, thank you for joining me, everybody, and thanks for sticking with me this far. Let's get into the nose and palate. Cheers, whiskey friends. Yeah, that's one thing that if you do get one of these, man, let it sit out and take your time with it. I was really overwhelmed with the oak the first time that I smelled this, and now smelling it now, even as it's been sitting out, and just it is just firing on all cylinders. And that just makes me a lot happier because I was having a tough time getting behind the oak. And we'll see on one particular part of the tasting if I continue to have a struggle getting behind the oak, particularly the finish, but we will see there. But going with the flavors, there is one note that stuck out to me as being kind of unique. It was a honeycomb note. And I know that's a bit distinguished from just saying honey, but in particular, honeycomb itself, if you've had the experience of kind of smelling and eating a honeycomb. One other thing that I think is weird with this one, you know, the oak is there and it's omnipresent, but I don't want to attribute it to a traditional oak characteristic like I usually would. Like when I describe what that oak smells like, I'm not saying it's like a deep wood or a musty wood or furniture varnish, I might say, or old antique store. Something with the 15-year might usually elicit that type of description. This one reminds me of like burnt toast, but specifically like a salted rye bread burnt toast. One other thing I get from this one too, and I think this is the note that gets pretty consistent for me across the experience, but I do get lots of chocolate from this, particularly in this case, chocolate covered espresso beans. I can even sway toffee a little bit there, but I think you kind of get the gist of the area that this lives in. You know, when we're talking about something that's 15 years, it's just got that dark presence, the dark chocolate espresso beans, the burnt toast. You know, even that honeycomb is usually like a darker smelling type of honey. I think that's it for the nose. Nothing else I want to highlight there. So let's get into the taste. We're going to break down the front of the palate, mid palate, and then we'll get into the finish. Cheers, everybody. Mm, man, it is rich, it is oily, and it is viscous. So the mouthfeel on this is pretty darn top notch. Oh, the finish on this. Wait till we get to the finish. It's hard to even talk my way through the finish. That's something that I'm kind of learning now on the fly as I want to enjoy this infinite finish. But going back to the front of the palette, it is actually very bright initially. And I think that's a bit of a surprise, you know, especially as you think about all the flavors that I threw off the nose. For the most part, I get these bright flavors. The one that really sticks with me, it doesn't quite articulate the sweetness that I'll get with other notes, but I get essentially what I would describe as an apple crisp. You know, if you had a dried apple, even with a little bit of saltiness on it, I get that note, and I find that kind of interesting. You know, and it's not like a vibrant apple; it's a dried apple crisp. The other things that stick out to me would be a deep cinnamon and a cocoa powder. So probably a dark cocoa powder, but some type of cocoa powder that even has that little bit of a bitterness to it. There is then a sweetness as well that's just kind of like Mingling but separate of all this, maybe I would call it a rock candy. Um, but not a flavored rock candy, just like the clear rock candy, but it's got that type of an intense condensed sweetness that takes a little bit for your tongue to kind of break it down in order to get there. Mm. Mid palate, the dark cocoa powder and the ooh, geez, that finish. The dark cocoa powder and that cinnamon carries through. There is a texture too about it, almost like a chocolate mousse. But if I combine that chocolate mousse with the cinnamon, it almost reminds me of a Mexican hot chocolate. But then I guess if you made a Mexican hot chocolate mousse, if that's a thing, I think I just invented something new. But maybe you get the point if you understand what I mean by the Mexican hot chocolate. But some take on mousse that would be with the cinnamon and make a Mexican hot chocolate. I think it makes sense. I'm a little iffy on this description now that I say it out loud, but I'm fine with it. Mm. Gosh, the front of the finish. I think this is the thing that I'm still struggling with. Despite how many times I've gone back to this one, I let this one air out for quite a bit. When I concentrate on the finish, there is a tannic spike that I get on the front end of this finish. It does dissipate, but if I concentrate on the finish, it draws my attention and it distracts me, and I don't like it. Um, so there is this one part of the finish that I find spiky, but once it dissipates, there is a whole lot of really good flavors in there. This is also the part of the experience that I begin to, oh gosh, you see me react to it every time. There's like this point about 5 to 10 seconds into the finish that finally just like hits you. Um, there is this note that I attribute to a raspberry cream, and this takes me back to a specific memory when combined with other things I'm getting off the finish. I mean, there is a vanilla cake to it, almost like a angel food cake, or maybe just a straight yellow cake, and also a chocolate fondant, which then reminds me of my wedding cake when combined with the raspberry cream in the middle. If you kind of get the sense of the type of raspberry cream that I'm talking about, it's going to be in like a wedding cake or some type of decadent pastry. But that really starts shining through. This finish is still going, by the way, but that really shines through. The tail end of it, and this is actually where I'm at right now, if I were to track it, it does go, the oak transitions more to a leather and then to a tobacco. And that's where I'm at. I'm tasting the tobacco. And it's really good. There's a sweetness too with that tobacco. It's a sweet tobacco. Man. Oh, man, the chocolate and then that chocolate's there. I described it as a chocolate fondant, but that's the experience that I get that's consistent throughout this is that chocolate note. Um, I do I did wonder on my first couple goes at this if it was over oaked. I wouldn't describe it necessarily as over oaked anymore. I the oak, it took me quite a few times, but I still say I keep getting that spiky note that's like tannic and just kind of just distracts me right there on the spot towards the finish, but then everything else I like. So it's almost like there's a scratch in the record and I'm enjoying the song and then it hits that scratch and then I keep enjoying the song. Well, let's pull up the official scores. I've talked enough and broken this one down. Thanks for hanging for me this long. I definitely talk longer than I intended to. So, breaking down the scores on this one, I don't think you're going to be surprised based on my description thus far. But on the channel, we do break down the scores into three overall constructs: a flavor score that represents 40%. That's just in how enjoyable it is to experience the nose and taste taste the front of the palate, mid palate, the finish. How does it taste? How does it smell? And how enjoyable is it? The experience score is more of a technical score. This finish is still going. The experience score is more of a technical score. That's worth 50%. That's about the mouth feel, the length of the finish. Obviously got a good score there. The balance of the whiskey, or in this case, it is a single barrel, so no one's blending it to be balanced. So maybe just the overall construction of the whiskey. Is it giving me a holistic experience, or is it spiky in places, or are there places in the experience that let me down, and it's not constructed in the way that I would like to see it? But that's kind of the experience score. Then value score is about the money paid, and it did lose a few points going up to $200. That price point starts getting a little iffy, but man, it's still a special pour. So with that all said, the final score was an 82. Anything between an 80 and an 89 is going to be classified as great on the scoring system. So this is a great pour, technically the highest scoring thing of the year thus far, behind the Magi Rye. For the recommend, I gave it a 7 out of 10. This is a special score, but would I recommend it to everybody? No, because not everyone's willing to throw down $200 on a bottle. So you got to know your audience there, and you got to recommend it to who would fit that. But if somebody were looking for like a birthday pour or something special, like, yeah, go splurge on one of these. These are really good. This is a good splurge bottle. Do I plan to buy another? Oh, yeah. I'm going to ride this train until it gets markedly above 200, and then I will be depressed and not ride the train anymore. And I have not bunkered enough of these to weather any storm because I keep drinking them. So, yeah, there's just going to be a point in time where I don't have these anymore. And that will be a sad point in time. But today we get to celebrate. Now, unveiling a new thing here is going to be our first Whiskey Friend guest review. So I had OH review it as well. We got a little form that people can fill out, and then gives us all these scores and does all these calculations, which makes things fun. And OH gave me his tasting notes that I can kind of pull up on the side here that I've been trying to ignore the entire time I've been talking, not to bias me. But as you can see, OH really loves this thing too. He rated it right in that great area as well, though he was really close to being amazing. I mean, this was a point away from a 90, which would then take it into amazing territory. But OH was a little stronger than me on the flavor. He was a lot stronger than me on the experience, though. A lot of that has to do with that tannic note that I'm noting on the finish. OH doesn't get that at all. And then on the value for OH, he's like, this is a special pour. This is still value for what it offers, even at 200. Now, if it gets up to 220, 230, we might be shifting his mind a little bit. So we're still right on the cusp there. But you can get the different interpretation of this exact same pour from a different point of view and from someone who has tried, gosh, OH, how many have you tried now? 5, 6, 7 of these? Gosh, most of the tastes I have come from you, so it has to be that high. But man, these are special pours, and this just gives you another perspective. Now, going back to OH's tasting notes, we hit a lot of the same notes. He gets a lot fancier when it comes to the spices. He calls out a cardamom, if I'm even saying that right, earthy black pepper, pine, and lemon curds. He found a lemon note. I do wonder if the lemon note was my translation of the apple crisp or something in there, because it's like I got the higher, fruit flavor, but I translated it more into a dried apple. He went with a lemon curd. So I always find these things interesting when you get them, because you see the translations of different minds. And he also pointed out Luxardo cherries quite a bit. He was finding that on the nose, and he was finding that on the finish. I think that's my equivalence of the raspberry cream. So once again, these whiskey reviews and these guest reviews give us a chance for a different perspective. And just know, with every flavor that anybody calls out, there is a spectrum to these things, and there's a different interpretation. But I would say there's also a rhyme if you follow it as well. You can kind of be like, yeah, I see that angle. But thank you, OH, for being our first Whiskey Friend guest review. And I think this is a very fitting bottle to have our first guest review on. Well, Thank you for joining me today, everybody. I know that was a very long winded review, but it's a really good pour, and we should keep track of these in 2023. Let me know if you found any of these 15-year proprietors in your area. What were the proof points? That's the thing I always like to track because, once again, I still think there's a pattern of 130 and above. I'm probably splitting hairs. There's probably some great 128s, but 130 and above is the thing that I find kind of separates the pack. But let me know what you think of your pours if you've gotten your hands on this, and let me know the price points as well. That's another interesting thing that we need to track and we need to communicate as the prices on these continues to grow and maybe boxes many of us out of the market, which definitely happens once you get to that 200 price point and then exceed that 200 price point. Well, you've heard me enough. Thank you for joining me today, whiskey friends. I'll catch you on the next review. Bye, everybody.